What's up, gang? Welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now, listen, the Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So, come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. Guys, welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mershazde, and boy, do we have a special guest. My man, Michael Bungay Stanier is in the house. What's up, Michael?
How you doing, Darius? Thanks for having me here. I'm delighted to be here. You're the one person who has a more complicated surname than I do, so we're kind of brothers from another mother already.
Man, do you know when you got the badass surnames like ourselves, it just means we're that
Anything's
much
possible.
more bad. Yeah. That's when the real juice happens.
That's right.
Man, welcome to The Greatest Few, man. I'm pumped to have you on the show. Do you mind if I do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get rocking here?
Yeah, your place is a disaster. Tidy it up. Come on, get it together.
If you only knew what was in the front, if they had a camera behind me, it would not look like that. It would look like shit.
It looks good. For those that can't see it, Darius has a pink unicorn hanging over his left shoulder. It's his spirit animal, and it's a fantastic set.
That's right, baby. So for listeners who are new to the show, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. People who are living their passions and those who are creating greatness in the world and doing so despite the odds. And my man Michael is neither short of passion nor greatness. So I got a text. Let me just say this. Michael doesn't know this. I get hit up, I don't know, at least 5 times a day for people that want to be on the show. Actually is like when you work your ass off at something, sometimes people start giving us a crap about it. And so we've been doing the show now for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years next month. And so I think we've interviewed a couple hundred people and people started paying attention. So we're starting to get some good traction on the show. So now we're like a known entity. We're actually like getting hit up. Like we got hit up by Moby last week. Moby's going to be on the show, which is kind of cool.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I was like, you know what's funny? There's a girl, Dr. Gabrielle, I can't remember her last name. I've been hitting her up to be on the show. She's like not responding to me, and then her publicist hit us up, and I was like, why don't you tell Dr. Gabrielle to return my text? So that's when you know you made it, when the person who's so big doesn't respond, that their publicist is hitting you up and not knowing that they're not responding.
Oh, that's funny.
So anyway, yeah, man, we it's kind of hard to get on the show now, but Bob Glazer's a buddy. He's been on the show a couple of times. And he knows what the format of the show is. And he's like, hey man, you got to get Michael on the show. He's got a new book coming out. I think he'd be great for the show. And I take, I really respect Bob. So I was like, oh hell yeah, man. If you give him the thumbs up, it's all good for me, man. So I was telling Michael before the show started, that's my introduction to Michael. Like we've never met each other before. I've never, I'm kind of in my world. He's in his world. And then Seth Godin, who we just interviewed on the show a couple weeks ago, I'm reading his new book, Song of Significance. And this is how I believe there's a God, because like things like I've never until Michael's came into my world through Bob. I'm reading Seth's book. Boom. Seth quotes Michael in his book. And I was like, oh, it's meant to be. He's going to be on the show in a couple weeks. So man, dude, I'm pumped to have you here, my brother. It's good to get to spend some time with you.
I'm glad the planets aligned and Bob and Seth gave you a little nudge, because I'm so happy to be here.
The consciousness is among us. So do you mind if I'm going to read your formal bio, and then I'd love to hear a little bit of your origin story.
Sure.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works well.
So Michael Bungay Stanier helps people know they're awesome and that they're doing great work. He's best known for The Coaching Habit, the best-selling coaching book of the century and recognized as a classic. His most recent book, How to Work with Almost Anyone, shows how to build the best possible relationship with the key people at work. Michael was a Rhodes Scholar. He's Australian and lives in Toronto, Canada. And you can learn more going to mbs.work. So we'll be talking about that later. But man, Rhodes Scholar, you're a smart dude. That's awesome, man. How do you become a Rhodes Scholar? Do you have to apply? Is that how it works?
You do. So this is how I became a Rhodes Scholar. My dad, I grew up in Australia. I was born in Australia, but my dad is English. He was one of the, they call him a 10-pound Poms, because they, cost them 10 quid. They get in a boat, they'd sail to Australia, and they were kind of welcomed into the Australian workforce. And my dad took advantage of that. Came over, met my mum, fell in love. I was their first son. And and I admire my dad. He's a great guy. And when I was 14 at high school, a teacher said, "Hey, Michael, kind of what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you going to do when you finish high school?" And I had no idea. But I said, "I'm going to go to Oxford University," because my dad had gone to Oxford University because he grew up in Oxford. That was his hometown. And the teacher, Peter Lennox, said, "Well, Michael, you'll have to be a Rhodes Scholar." And I'm like, I don't know what that means, but sure, okay, whatever. But that seed got planted as a 14-year-old. So went to high school, finished high school, spent a year overseas traveling around, visiting England, actually, visiting Oxford, and then went to university in Canberra, my hometown, at the Australian National University. And I just got this thought around what it means to be a Rhodes Scholar. So in one of my years, I applied, and I was pretty excited because I went and said, "How do you do this?" And I went, "Well, you send in your letters of application and the proof that you're kind of good and smart and whatever you can, the best you can be." And everybody gets a first interview, and then we get a short list, and then the short list gets an interview, then we pick one. I was like, great. So I sent all my stuff in, and I got a letter back going, "We're not going to interview you," which was crushing because the woman had literally said, "We interview everyone." So I was like, I must be bad. I must be so at the bottom of this list. But I went away and licked my wounds for a year or two, and then reapplied. This time a little more focused, a little more intentionally. And I got a first interview, and that went well enough. And then I got a final interview. It was very exciting. And I walked in, it's intimidating because I walk into a room and it's like this big oak paneled room, and there's like 15, impressive people who are there to interview me. And the first question was, "Michael, you've done an arts degree in literature, you've done a law degree, but now you're applying to do a political degree at Oxford. What's your problem? Can't you make up your mind?" And I accidentally made a joke. I went, "Well, yes and no." And everybody laughed. And I went, "Oh, that was a good joke, an accidental good joke." So I laughed. Everybody relaxed. I relaxed. I had a really good interview, and I won the Rhodes Scholarship. And that means
Wow.
going over to Oxford to study. And it did two brilliant things, Darius. It stopped me becoming a lawyer because I just had got a law degree, but that had been going really badly. I literally finished law school being sued by one of my professors for defamation. So really, it was not going well. And I met my wife,
Wow.
and this was 31 years ago. And so we're still married, and life is good because of that. So that's just
Is
a little
your
taste.
wife a Rhodes Scholar as well?
She's not, but
Ah,
she's got
weak
she
sauce.
well, she's got her own brilliant origin story. She was a high school dropout, and she dropped out of high school, went back in her 20s, ended up doing a PhD at Oxford in her mid 30s. So in some ways, her story is more impressive than mine. And she happened to live in a house with two other Rhodes Scholars in our year. So I had no friends at Oxford, so I was hanging out with these two other people I just met. And I met Marcella, and boom, it all went from there.
That's amazing, man. So you guys got kids? You and your wife?
We're happily child free.
Uh,
We've read all the statistics, and I'm like, other people, they're going to be much better parents than we are. So if you got kids, Darius, I salute you. You're doing a good job. Carry on.
yeah. Any pets? Any pets? Or
We
are
do
you
have
pet free
pets.
too?
No, we have pets. We got a couple
Dogs,
of
cats.
cats. We got a couple of cats. In fact, we've had cats in the past, and they've come and gone. But we've got two brand new cats. One is called um, Sydney Nolan, named after a famous Australian painter, and the other one is called Maud Lewis, named after a famous Canadian painter. And they were feral cats. They got rescued. And so we're in the process of trying to deferalize them and reintroduce them to a home. So we're seeing how that goes. My
They
wife
better
loves
level.
cats. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I said they better level up because their parents went to Oxford. Um,
That's right. I've had that conversation with them. I'm like, come on, cats. I'm expecting great things from you.
you guys, listen. I don't want to hear about the catnip. I don't want to hear about the
Exactly.
mouse. All I
Exactly.
want is brilliance from the both of you. None of this
That's it.
feral bullshit. Um, I'm allergic. That's like adopted. I'm allergic to cats, but I have two kids. So you named your cats after painters. I named my sons after poets.
Oh,
So
brilliant.
my oldest son's name's Rumi, like the poet
Oh, yeah, of
Rumi,
course.
and
Yeah.
my youngest son is named Pablo after Pablo Neruda.
Oh, fantastic.
So
I have
so we
I've stayed I've stayed in the house next to Pablo Neruda's house in Chile, because
no
I
way.
wrote I for my master's degree at Oxford. I wrote on Isabel Allende, a Chilean writer, and I
Nice.
just happened to stay with a friend of a friend, and he's like, "This is Neruda's house," so I know Neruda's poetry really well. That's brilliant.
Pretty cool, man. Sorry, I like to derail conversation all the time, especially when I hear interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So so yeah, so you're at Oxford, you meet your wife, and sounds like you're studying literature. Is that correct?
I did. I did a master's degree in literature. She was doing a PhD in literature. And
And,
when I
and
finished Oxford, I still had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm like now 25 or 26 or something. Um, and I stumbled onto this company, which was an innovation company. And I didn't even know what that meant. Nobody did. I kept asking around. Everybody's like, I don't know, what is that? But now I can tell you, they invent products and services for
hmm,
other companies. It was so this is mid 90s, so before innovation had really become a thing and more of a kind of conversation. And it was brilliant for me because they liked my weirdness. So at that stage, I had long hair, earrings, I made my own clothes. So they're like, "You're smart and you're a bit weird. We're going to hire you." So I spent 5 or 6 years running focus groups, talking to consumers, trying to figure out what they wanted, but weren't able to tell us that what they wanted. And then I would go and I would invent stuff. I'd invent prototypes of different things. I played a very small role in stuffed crust pizza for Pizza Hut. I helped
wow.
invent a single malt whiskey. Back in the 90s, whiskey was only drunk by kind of old, grumpy men. So they were trying to make it cool and hip for young people. So I helped invent a single malt whiskey, which subsequently has been called the worst single malt whiskey ever invented.
No, no, you didn't win any gold medals or
No
silver
gold
medals for
medals.
that.
No, no. It's called Loch Dew. So it was a black whiskey, which looked cool but tasted disgusting.
Oh,
So I had this moment, Darius, where I'm like, I actually want to have a life where I have impact and I do good things. And if my two highlights of my career so far are stuffed crust pizza and an undrinkable whiskey, I've got to do something differently. So I left that company, moved into the world of change management, in part because my experience in that other company is we'd have all these good ideas and they would go into that company and die. And I was like, why don't these ideas get picked up? Why? So I went and learned about change management. That consultancy took me from London to Boston, where I helped set up an office there. That kind of went down in flames about 3 years later. So my wife and I, living in Boston, went to our favorite pub, had a few beers, and then we each wrote down the name of 3 cities that we'd like to move to on the back of a beer coaster. On the count of three, we flipped them over. Toronto made both the beer coasters, even though I'd never been to Toronto. So we booked tickets to fly up to Toronto. I got a job up there, but our flight out of Boston was on 9/11. So not only did that cause, short-term chaos with the travel, it meant that my job that I'd lined up disappeared as well. So shortly after that, I started my first company, and that became Box of Crayons, which is a learning and training development company that teaches sort of the key tools around coaching and being more coach-like to big companies.
so how old were you when you started that company?
I was mid 30s. It's 21 years old. So yeah, early 30s, 33 or 34.
And so when you started it, it was really kind of out of the, solving this problem of seeing the black whiskeys of the world not take off the way that they should. Is that
No,
essentially it?
it was solving the problem that I was unemployed and I couldn't figure out how to get another job. So I'm like, I need some, the first 2 years of Box of Crayons, my business plan was find somebody with a wallet and a pulse and see what I could do. Because I had a random selection of stuff. I knew about strategy, I knew about innovation, I knew about market research, I knew about change management. So I could be a kind of jobbing consultant, facilitator, teacher. I could do I knew a little bit about a lot. But kind of in the fourth or fifth year, somebody asked me to design a coaching program for their firm. And that's when I was like, I think the way coaching is taught to managers and leaders and organizations is done really badly. Secondly, I've got
Hmm.
an opinion about how to do it differently, a point of difference in the market. And thirdly, there is a market. I can actually sell this. And so that became Box of Crayons getting real focus, which is like, you know what, we've got that. And then in 2016, I published this book, The Coaching Habit, which has gone on to sell, you know, some millions of copies. And that's the kind of the engine and the IP that helps that company thrive.
So let's talk a little bit about that book, because having sold a book, I mean, I writing a book, first of all, publishing a book is hard just by itself. There's
This is,
it's like the percentage of people, if you ask, I think it's like in the 90 percentile. It's like when you ask people if they want to write a book, there's this really high percentile of people that want to, I should write a book on that, right?
yeah,
And then the percentage of people that actually do it's like minuscule. I did a coaching, like a book writing cohort where it was like
hmm
me and 19 other people in a group,
yeah,
and my book just poured out of me. Like I wrote my book and I think I wrote the first page like April 8th, and I had my rough draft done by June 25th,
wow,
right? And
that's fast.
I had
Yeah,
a final draft done September 25th,
that's
and
fast.
I was and I think one other person in my group finished their book, and these are all
Yeah,
people that paid money, like
right.
a lot of money, to like join a group of people to help them write a book. So writing a book's hard, number one, and I'm doing that to set you up to sound like a badass, because you are. Um, and like I think I sold 5,000 copies of my book, which is
Yeah,
really hard. That's even really hard, right?
that is
Maybe
really
I'm
hard.
10,000 now. You're at
Yeah.
millions. How did that happen?
Well, a, a luck. Good luck is part of it. Not just luck, but some luck. So I tell you, um, because the statistics of being successful with a book are really grim.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
nothing.
yeah, like 95% of books sell less than 5,000 copies, which is for publishers considered break even. Less than 0.1% of books sell more than 100,000 copies. So it's really hard to sell books. So if you've found writing a book difficult, and it can be, selling a book is is even harder, which is like
Way
part of the
harder.
misery. And with The Coaching Habit, it wasn't my first book. I'd written 3 or 4 books before then. And I went back to the New York publisher who had published another book of mine called Do More Great Work. And it had actually done pretty well. It sold 80,000 copies. So I was like, that's a solid B list book. And I pitched them this idea, and they're like, okay. And I went away and wrote it. And they went, no, we don't like that book. And I was like, okay. So I went away and wrote another version of it. And they turned that down as well. And they did this 6 times. So finally, I was like, this is breaking my heart, because I kept going, we like you, we like the idea, but we don't like this book, so take another shot at it. So I kind of lost myself and lost my way for a bit. And then I just sat down and I went, what am I doing? And I got really clear on what I thought this book should be. And I went back to them, and now I was going to call their bluff. I'm like, this is it. This is my final offer. This is the book. It's a yes or a no? Because I'm not going to go back and have try and guess what book you're looking for. And I was certain that they were going to say yes, Darius, because I'm like, I'd written a good book. I had people who follow me on LinkedIn and wherever else. I had a track record. And they said no. I was like, I was stunned. I honestly was not expecting that at all. So again, went away and licked my wounds for a bit, and then made a really good decision. I decided I was going to self-publish this book, but I was going to
Wow.
do it in a way that felt like a professional. Because there's a way of self-publishing where you can just, get a PDF and upload it to the Amazon machine, and they'll turn it into a Kindle book for you. But I was like, no, I want something more than that. So I hired an editor, and I hired a copy editor, and I found a designer, and then I found a kind of partner around distribution. And so I self-published a book with this determination that it would be indistinguishable from a professionally published book.
Yep.
And so to answer your question, how has this sold so many copies? Well, one reason is it answers a need, which is that it unweirds coaching. So it kind of the solution and the problem is in the title, the coaching habit. So it makes coaching practical and useful and everyday for people who may not think of themselves as coaches, but they know they have to use coaching as how they lead and how they manage. Secondly, I'd written it so many times that it was the leanest, clearest version of this book that it could be, because I just squeezed all the fat out of it, all the moisture. It was like the shortest book I could write that was still full of useful stuff.
Killing your
Thirdly,
baby. That's what they
Yeah,
call it.
yeah, exactly. So I just I just done it so many times. I kind of got all the excess out of it. Thirdly, I set myself the goal for it to be a classic. I wanted it to be a classic in the field. And I said, for that to happen, I need to market it for a year, not just for the launch, but I need to be actively engaged in getting this book and the word out for a year. So I gave myself a year of appearing on podcasts and writing articles and doing all the things you do to try and make people notice your book. And then fourthly, I just got lucky because I've written 3 or 4 books since then, and they've sold well. They've sold, I don't know, one sold more than 100,000 copies, and the others have sold some tens of thousands of copies. So that's pretty good. But none of them have had the rocket ship of the coaching habit. So it's just a right book, right time, word of mouth. The magic wheel starts spinning. The algorithm rewards success. So the more successful you are, the more successful you are, and it's just kind of it's got free of the gravity that pulls everything else down.
And the greatest part of it all is that you don't have to pay anything to a publisher because
Well, that's
you
right.
own the book.
So,
Yeah.
so a regular publisher will give you somewhere between 8 and 10%
Right.
royalties based on your book after you've earned back your advance. With the business model that I ended up using, which is working with a company called Page Two in Vancouver, which is a hybrid publisher, you pay money up front. You pay them to produce your book, but the royalties are more in the kind of 30 to 40% range. So that was a decision that has literally earned me some millions of dollars more because of the way the business deal was set up.
That's
So
amazing, man.
thank you, Workman Publisher, for turning me down 7 times because that was a great blessing. Yeah, exactly. High
Yeah,
fiving
yeah.
them.
High five. You
Yeah,
just put way more money in my pocket. I'm so
exactly.
happy. I was so pissed back then.
I know exactly. You got it.
Yeah, that's the higher power at work, like just
Yeah,
showing you that it's funny, man. Like curveballs, like they sometimes like things happen for you that you just don't even know, you know?
yeah. Well, we're
So
talking
that's
about Seth Godin, um, and his new book is terrific. But one of the books I have on my shelves, which was one of his older classics, is called The Dip, and it's about how do you know when to keep going and how do you know when to give up. And for the most part, he's like, mostly we give up a bit too soon. Sometimes we
right.
stick at it too long. And, that's kind of one of the influences for me going, man, I've been rejected 7 times by a fancy New York publisher who actually who I have a track record with. Do I bet on myself or do I not bet on myself? And, I've bet on myself in other ways since then, and not all of those have worked out. But there is something to say, sometimes it's worth taking the plunge.
Yeah, that's great, man. So what let's talk a little bit about, the new book.
Mm.
Obviously you've put in the reps, how many books have you written prior to this? This is your what, seventh book?
Oh, I think it might be my ninth. I've slightly lost track because some books I'm
Yeah,
not quite sure.
who's counting? Who's counting? Right.
I know.
So you've been out there, you're doing the
I have.
coaching. I have a lot of questions about coaching, by the way, but
Yeah.
I do want to honor the book, and then I'll come back to my coaching questions. So you've written a bunch of books. You got what was let's talk about the new book. Like, tell me,
Yeah.
like, what was the kind of the impetus to put the book out?
Mm,
What's gotten you motivated to do this? And yeah, tell us why you
I
decided to
will.
write the book and more about the book.
Yeah. So then the book is called How to Work with Almost Anyone: 5 Questions for Building the Best Possible Relationships. And the big idea behind it is our happiness and our success depends so much on our working relationships. But most of the time, we just cross our fingers and we hope for the best. Like, whether you're my boss or whether you're my team or whether you're a client or a customer or a vendor or a key collaborator, mostly we're like, okay, let's see how it goes. and you just kind of hope that it's going to be great. And I say, look, what if you could build the best possible relationship with those key working relationships? Relationships that are safe and vital and repairable. I want it to be safe, that you feel good about how you show up. I want it to be vital, meaning you're brave and courageous and you have that psychological bravery. And I want it to be repairable, so you know how to fix it when things go wrong, because things always go wrong. So that's the big idea behind it. How did I choose this book to write? Well, when I get to the end of one book, and I'm trying to become a writer, meaning not just that I have books, but I'm trying to make writing the central thing that I do in this world. I'm like, of all the books I've got ideas for, because I've got a few, what's my best guess at the next best, most useful book that I can write? And I looked at some of the options I had, and I chose a different book. I chose a book I wanted to write on change, and I started to write it, and I started to write this book instead. So I'm like, okay, you're talking about the higher powers. I was nudged to say this is the next best book. And it fits really well with the coaching books as well, because both the coaching book and this book is about how do you work with people? How do you bring out the best in each other? How do you do work that matters and have impact in the world?
And so when you were like writing the book, what was your approach on it? Like, kind of give us an overview. If you're a person, obviously, it sounds like you've spent a lot of time in the coaching world. Is this
I
written
have,
with the
yeah,
idea of being a coach, or is this written with the idea of an executive in mind? Tell us a little bit about
yeah.
that.
I'm broadly trying to write for people who interact with other human beings. So, I have a fairly wide audience. But if I'm being really specific about it, the person I'm normally trying to write for is a mid-level manager in an organization. They quite like their work, they quite like their team, and they're stuck a little bit. They're like, how do I do this better? How do I deepen my strength? Uh, Deepen the impact that I'm having and find my more joy in the work that I'm doing. And my goal with lots of my books is to try and unweird stuff that people kind of know about. So the coaching habit, and there's a sister book to that called The Advice Trap. That's about unweirding coaching. So a regular person can go, oh, well, that's what HR or whoever has been banging on about. If that's coaching, I could probably do that. And when I say to people, look, your working relationships are such a big influence on your success and happiness, everybody goes, yeah, work gets done through other people. But nobody's ever taught them the practicalities of how to build psychological safety, how to build more resilient working relationships. So all of my books are very much designed around the practicalities of actually getting stuff done. So in this book, at the heart of it is this idea you want to have a keystone conversation, a conversation about how you work together rather than what you're working on. So I'll give you an
And so,
example.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm
please.
monologuing a bit here, Darius. So shut me up if you need to.
No, no, no. I love this. Please.
But one of the things we didn't do, but we could have done before we kind of hit record on this, is I could have said, Darius, before we jump into the work, the conversation we're having, talk to me about what makes a really great guest on your show. Tell me about what the guests that you love, the ones that shine, the one that your audience loves. Tell me what's the best way that I can be to serve you. And then I might say, and Darius, let me tell you about the interviewers I really love. They're got a good sense of themselves. They're not just reading a list of prepared questions. They're willing to kind of go with the flow. They want to hear my stories. They kind of have a laugh when I'm trying to make a joke. Those are the interviewers that I really love. And it's kind of a negotiation about how will we be best for each other before we
Right.
jump into the interview. And we didn't do that. And we got lucky because actually I love your interviewing style. And so far you look like you're enjoying my interviewee style. Maybe you're
Yeah.
faking it. I can't tell. Um, but we could have set things up just to give ourselves a better chance of success. And that, in a microcosm, is what this book is about, the 5 questions that lie behind the keystone conversation.
I love that, man. I do think we got a little lucky here. You're just a good interviewer, and I feel like I have a good. I intuitively can read people, so for
Yeah,
me, it's like I'm super curious, right? So we got
yeah.
lucky on that. But yeah, if you're a listener, you're gonna love the rest of the show. I don't even know what it's gonna be about, but it'll be good. So so let's talk about the 5 keystone questions. Obviously,
Yeah,
people need to read the book to learn about it,
yeah.
but do you mind going over those with us?
No, that sounds great. So the key thing to take away from this, I'll give you the 5 questions, but you don't have to ask them all. You don't have to follow them in a particular order. You can, but you don't have to, because the real takeaway from this conversation is talk about how should we work together before you jump into the work. Or even if you're halfway through, you're like, it's going well so far, but let's have another conversation about how we can do this even better. But here's the questions that I suggest. The first one is called the amplify question, because it's all about identifying and speaking to the best of you. So that's the question. What's your best? So I didn't want to say, what are you good at? Because that's not always useful data. I didn't want to say what are your strengths, because even though I can, I've seen Strength Finder and the 5 words that people get, I'm like, I don't know how to use that. Um, I want to understand when you shine and when you flow. So flow is that internal state. That Hungarian psychologist Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi talks about the flow state,
Yep.
where time speeds up and slows down, and you're in the zone, and it's the right balance between stuff you can do and stuff that stretches you a little bit. What's that look like? Tell me about you in the flow state. And the shine is the external view, which is like, when people light up when they're doing the thing that they're meant to do, they're like, this is it. So tell me those moments where you really shine, where you really kind of at the top of your game. And the Keystone Conversation, people ask and answer that question. So, if you and I were going to co-write a book together, I'm like, my 10th book needs to be co-authored. I want to co-author it with Darius. It's been long enough since he wrote his last book, so he's forgotten about the pain of writing a book. So we'll do it, and we could go. So tell me about your best when you are working with other people. Tell me about you when you're in your zone. Tell me about you when you're in your flow. And I would do the same for you. And we're like, great. We've got a real sense of the best of us. And now that I know that, I don't make it up about you. I won't project it on you. I'll actually go, I think I know what I'm trying to get Darius to, and he knows what he's trying to get me to. Then the second question is called the steady question. And the steady question is, what are your practices and preferences in terms of how you work? It's kind of like the logistics, the mechanics of actually how you get things done. Because sometimes there's real kind of misunderstanding and frustration happening just because you do things different ways. So that's everything from, are you a Slack person or an email person? Are you a morning person? Even things like, what's your name? Or what your pronouns are. That can be a really important and useful exchange. Like, for instance, I really don't like people calling me Mike. I've got 3 people in this world who call me Mike, my 2 brothers and my mum. That's it. Everybody else, I'm like, my name's Michael. So don't just unilaterally call me Mike. And you might have something to say, it's like, and like my surname, Bungay Stanier. It's slightly complicated because when I got married, I took my wife's name and we combined them, but there isn't a hyphen. And it drives me nuts when people randomly add a hyphen into my surname. I'm like, there's no hyphen there. It's an invisible hyphen.
That's not my name, damn it.
It's not my name, exactly. So just that conversation about the logistics of how you work, because those logistics will feel like common sense to you, but they won't necessarily be clear or common sense to other people.
Isn't it the worst when you correct them and then they still fucking call you Mike?
I know. I'm like, come on, man.
Dude, Darius somehow becomes Darius, and then I'm like, I like nudge them back. I'm like, yeah, everyone, I'll throw a few like immediate Dariuses in there. I'll be like, like being Darius, I'll speak of it. I'll throw a third person comment
exactly.
in.
As somebody called Darius.
Yeah,
let me quote somebody called the same name as me, whose name is Darius.
Darius the Great was an amazing ruler of the world. I love that my parents named me after Darius. Yeah, and then it ends up back at Darius. I'm like, does this person have a fucking hole in their brain?
Yeah, exactly.
But people want to be called their name, so I love that, the preferences.
Yeah,
it's interesting too. I mean, especially with the pronoun thing now, because I think some people, it's been politicized, right? So unfortunately, so because it's like, hey, look, just call people by what the hell they want to be called. Who cares, right?
That's how I feel about it as well. I mean, I'm old enough to go, I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting to have to kind of lead with your pronouns and have people say I prefer whatever it might be. But, it really matters to some people. And I'm like, how hard is it for me to call them them or they if that's the pronoun that they choose? Easy enough.
I struggle with it too much, so I'm like, all right, just call people by their first name, and then I don't have to think about it because it gets really like my brain's like, oh, this is hard. But I respect it either way. People want to be seen, right?
Yeah,
and
people want to be seen.
That's what this is all about, right? It's people being seen and heard. And to your point, like I think that there's a value around, I guess, acknowledging their preferences. I have a question on this though, because it can, as a manager, right?
Yeah.
I got 10 different people with 10 different preferences. I mean, sometimes and I see this as a style of leadership, right? This is more of like a, like collaborative style leadership.
Hmm.
And, as you know, being a well-learned human being, we got autocratic leadership, authoritarian
Yeah,
leadership, strategic
exactly.
leadership, and you got all sorts of leaders. So if I'm more of a older school strategic leader, I'm not saying I got to be like Donald Trump, but be a hardcore autocrat. But let's just say I'm more of a Silicon Valley strategic leader, and I
Yeah,
got this more collaborative style that you're suggesting, and I'm like, oh man, I don't have time for that shit. Like, I want to be a better leader, but that's a lot of work. Like, how do
that
you
is a,
how do
yeah.
you approach that?
Well, the first place I go, Darius, is to Daniel Goleman's work. So Daniel Goleman popularized emotional intelligence. In about the year 2000, wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review called "Leadership That Gets Results." And he actually said, look, there are 6 different styles of leadership. They all have their place. They all have moments where that's the appropriate place or style in which to lead. And he said that most leaders use 1 or 2 or the most 3 of those leadership styles. The most effective leaders use all 6. So
Right.
whatever label you want to give this is one of the styles of leadership that is available to you to lead. And you can choose to use it or not use it, but every choice you make has prizes and punishments. There's advantages and disadvantages, a cost and there's a reward. And you need to just weigh up and go, is this worth it or not? And what the research tells you is this collaborative style of leadership, if that's the label you want to give it, is a really effective way of leading if you care about bringing out the best in your people, if you care about retention, if you care about culture, if you care about strategy and getting the right things done. Now, if you don't care about strategy and culture and people and keeping the good people, then you can lead any way you want. But if you do care about that, and most leaders care about some of that, you might want to think about how much of this you might choose to add to the way that you lead. I saw a stat the other day that said 70% of Gen Z people leave their first job within a year.
Mm,
I mean, that is devastating if you're a company who's spent all that time trying to recruit people and get them and onboard them, because it takes 6 months to get somebody up to speed. And then all that investment walks out the door because, as the famous saying goes, people join organizations and they leave managers.
right.
So are you the type of manager that people leave? And if you are, you might want to decide what type of leadership style or styles you're choosing to deploy. Now, you
So,
ask, there's a second part to your question, Darius, which is I got 10 different people. They've all got different practices and preferences.
right.
How much time am I going to spend trying to tailor my everything to 10 different people?
Right.
Well, you have a choice. Just because they've told you your practices and preferences doesn't mean they get what they want. Just like you don't always get what you want. If part of the way of what we're doing here is trying to build adult to adult relationships, one definition of that is being able to ask for what you want, knowing that the answer may be no. So, what's good about this is it takes implicit conflict and makes it explicit and solvable. So, if you say to me, I'm the sort of person who, if I send an email, I expect a response within 12 minutes. And if I say to you, if I get an email, I work on the assumption that I've got 3 days to respond to an email because there's other channels which are more urgent, like Slack's more urgent and then text more urgent still. Now we understand that we've got a conflict and we might be able to figure it out. And you might say as a boss, so if I send you an email, I need it back in 24 hours. That's the way I work around here.
I look. Here's been my experience, and I've ran. My biggest organization, we had 1,000 employees, right? So I think that people want to, like, going back to what I said before. I just think people want to be seen and heard. They don't necessarily expect that you are going to 100% cater to their needs. There are
Right.
some needs that are non-negotiables for them,
Yeah.
right? And they want some empathy around that stuff when it's possible. But I think it just comes down to being, hey, I just want to check the box that, hey, you heard me, and if you choose to go
Right.
against it, at least may have a good reason for that, right?
That you are spot on. And what this does, and I love that you're saying this because both the coaching habit, the advice trap, and now how to work with almost anyone have at their heart are you seeing the other person? Are you
Right.
connecting with them on a human to human level? And just the other day, I saw the chief innovation officer of a great place to work speak. And he said the thing that distinguishes or correlates between the companies at the very top of that list, one of the four things he mentioned was a deep listening culture. In other words, a
Mm.
place where people felt seen and heard.
Yeah. And you can, my belief is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because as a leader, I believe that you can design for that, right? I think, look, part of it, you could design really, if I want to go really deep here, I could design my hiring process to make sure I hire people that think that way, right?
Yeah,
I can design systems and processes around letting people be heard.
yeah,
And then last but not least, I could design on how I train my managers to make sure
yeah,
that they are building those muscles. So going to that, I mean, I could speak to all four of those, but
yeah,
going to the last area, I think this is where a lot of organizations struggle, right? Because you're busy doing what I call BAU, business as usual. I'm
yeah,
running the business. I got fires blowing up, and it's like, oh, stop! We got to do active listening practice, right? So
yeah.
how do you think, like, when you start thinking like, great, this is good content, this makes
Mm.
sense, the data supports this, but hold on, Darius, you got to stop what you're doing, and you got to go and make sure that your managers are starting to do this stuff. How does the rubber meet the road with this type of stuff?
Yeah. You've nailed it really in a way that most people don't get, which is to make change happen in an organization, there are different levers you have to, or different areas you have to look at and think about. So you need to address it at an individual behavior change level. And that is often, is it good training? There's a ton of bad training. There's a ton of bad stuff, which is like boring, tedious, too long, too theoretical, doesn't really practice, doesn't kind of make it, doesn't collide with reality. So, but let's work on the assumption that you've got training that is useful, grounded in the reality of the people that are actually there, that are driven to try to engage and use the techniques we know that will help nudge behavior change. That can be a really powerful place to start. So, Box of Crayons, the training company I started, we go, look, here are the five reasons people resist coaching. I don't have time. So people go, great. Our belief, and we'll train you in this, is if you can coach in 10 minutes or less. And then they go, second resistance, I still don't have time. Even if I could coach somebody in 10 minutes or less, I'm so busy. And I'm like, it's not, coaching isn't adding to what you're currently doing, it's replacing how you currently behave. So it's not an addition to your current responsibilities, it's you doing the same stuff, but in a coach like way. The third one is, what is the third one? I don't know. I don't. I'm not. I forgot my own spiel.
Yeah,
The
too
fourth
much
one is.
stuff in your
I know it's over my
too much
brain.
shit in your
I'll come
brain,
back to.
man.
I'll come back to the third one. It's amazing, but I'm going to keep it secret for now.
Absolutely world changing.
Yeah, exactly. It's stunning. Um, the fourth the fourth one is. Oh, the third one is like, I don't want to be a coach. And I'm like,
Right.
great. I don't want you to be a coach either. You were hired to be a salesperson or a marketing person or an ops person or who knows. I want you to be you, but I want you to be more coach like. So it's not a new role, it's a way of managing and leading and showing up. Then the fourth one is, I'm not even sure what coaching is because it's one of those words that wafts around and everybody's heard of it, but nobody knows what it means. And I'm like, it means, can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more
Mm.
slowly? So that's the behavior change, so they know what we're going to be working on. And then the fifth one is, what's in it for me? I can get why Darius wants me to be a coach or more coach like, because that's going to help the culture and help productivity. But what do I get out of it? I'm like, you get to work less hard but have more impact in the work. So you ground it. So those are the points of resistance and the deep needs that people doing this training have. And you build a training experience that addresses those fears and those points of resistance. But the training is just one part of it. Because, the classic metaphor is you send people away on a training. It's like taking a goldfish out of a tank of dirty water, cleaning the goldfish, and then putting it back in the tank of dirty water. Nothing changes
Right.
because it gets dirty soon enough. So you have to figure out how to clean the tank. So that is when you start thinking about changing structures, changing explicit values, hiring processes. It's when you start thinking about, how do we get the senior leadership team to actually change their behavior? Because if you go on a training course to be more coach like, say, and then you come back and then your boss's boss, is still old school authoritarian, you're like, doesn't seem like this is the behavior that succeeds around here. I'm going to behave the way my boss's boss behaves. So there's other things to be thinking about as well. And if, like you're running a company of 1,000 people, you're like, we need to coordinate between all of these things. So we shift the expectations of the leadership team. We tweak some of the structures, maybe some of even the physical environment, and we deliver really brilliant training. All of that's going to help shift the culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd mentioned to you I wrote a book. My book is called The Core Value Equation,
Mm.
and it's about how do you design values so that they can become the language of accountability in an organization. So it's a book, a design book essentially.
Yeah, great.
And based on what you're saying, like my brain's like, well, what I just heard Michael say is I need to make sure my values are alive and well in my organization,
Yep.
and then that will attract the right type of people, and I got to build
Right.
systems around that, like my hiring processes,
Right.
all the things that I call it scaffolding, all the scaffolding
That's
you got to
right.
build it in order to scale. But you don't really need that early on, and probably most people are listening to this, maybe you have 100 employees or less. I think if you got 100 employees or less, time is limited. You got a small executive team, more than likely a couple, maybe 5 people. You
Yep.
know, they got a lot on their plate, they're wearing a lot of hats. It's not this big executive, like, huge company.
Yep.
And my belief is like, I don't have to convince someone to do something if it's part of their fundamental belief structure. They just kind
Right.
of do it organically. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Well, I think you're laying down the gauntlet to make values real for people, because most corporate values suffer death by lamination. You know, that somebody's come up with these kind of slightly anodyne, slightly boring, slightly obvious values. You know, they've printed them out, they've stuck them up on the wall. Everybody's been sent a copy that they've stuck up on the wall, and then they're kind of mostly
Yep.
ignored. Where it's like, how do I even make those real? And
Words on
so,
paper. Words on
words on
paper.
paper, exactly.
Yep.
So it takes quite a lot of work to say, how do our values become embedded in the work we do and the structures we have? Because, you know, that quote from Churchill, um, uh, something like man or people shape buildings and thereafter buildings shape people, which is like your structures change the way that you work. So if you
Right.
want people to behave in a way that is accorded to your values, it has to be built into the visible and invisible structures that are around you, because that is the greatest influence on how people behave. And that is like, okay, so what if we're designing a compensation system? How do our values speak to our compensation system?
Right.
If we're
Right.
designing an org chart, how do we design an org chart that is in true alignment to what our values speak to? And then it becomes most interesting, Darius, I think, when you have values which are in tension with each other. Because I think the best values are in tension with each other. You know, for instance, one of the values we have at my new company, MBS.works, is be generous whilst knowing your boundaries.
Mm.
And it's not just be generous, meaning just give everything away. It's like we're trying to find a tension between giving and being open-hearted as much as possible, but also keeping ourselves safe and our organizational safe in terms of not being silly about that. And it's when you're trying to find the way that these values play with each other and dance with each other, and then you bring them to the hard work of designing a comp system, for instance, that's where you actually have a chance of making your values uh, infuse infuse who shows up and who does the work in your organization.
How do you going to that last point using your MBS.works example?
Yeah.
What happens? Yeah, I get the tension around that, but what about when there's a heritage that was built? And when you're building any organization, there's always
Yeah.
this heritage that isn't necessarily relevant
Yeah.
as you become more mature or as opportunities present themselves that are really important, but the heritage gets in the way.
Mm.
How do you think through that?
Well, I mean, legacy systems can be brilliant and they can be a curse. And I think we typically underestimate how strong a pull the status quo has on us. It's got a heavy gravity. It keeps pulling us back. And I think what the question that people have to wrestle with when they see a new opportunity and they want to say yes to it is, what do we have to say no to make this yes a real yes? And most often people don't wrestle with that hard challenge. Because this new thing comes along and they're like, this is going to be great. This is a great opportunity. This is the next thing we should go for. Let's commit. But they're just adding the yes onto the legacy system, and it doesn't work most of the time.
Right.
So what you're looking for is to go, what's the no? It's kind of like, what do I need to say no to about who I am today, so I can say yes to future me?
Right.
And part of why that's hard is it's like, who do we need to say no to? Because
Right.
almost
Yeah.
always there's a what associated, there's a who connected to the what you're saying no to.
Always a who.
Yeah. So you're like, so whose heart am I going to break? And I said before about choices have prizes and punishments. You've got to wrestle with the prizes and punishments, the disappointments, the fact that you will find people going, what are you doing? I trusted you and you're letting me down because you're abandoning this to go after something else. And it's actually wrestling with that kind of deeper commitment around, we've got to say no to some things that feel real and precious and important to people, so that we can say a wholehearted yes to the thing that's calling us forward.
I love that, man. Michael, you're so smart. I'd love to go back to the book. Thank you for that. You don't know that was a loaded question, and I was trying to solve a problem for myself. So thanks for the coaching.
Sure.
You're like, where the hell is this heritage stuff coming from? It's like Darius he's got an ulterior motive. Oh man, Michael's such a good coach for me. So going back to the book, so obviously this is a book to help people work better with their peers, with their team members, maybe even with the people that they are subordinate to, depending on how you characterize an organization.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about like the biggest thing that folks that are going to read this book or should read this book, like what's the biggest problem or what's the biggest struggle? The person that's having this big problem right now, you're like, hey, because you don't know this, I'm like an aggressive reader of books. I try to get through a book a week, and I have friends who are like, hey, what book should I read? And I'm like, what problem are you trying to solve right now?
Exactly.
Like, and because I'm like, I got. I mean, you just want entertainment. Like, I got entertainment books. You want to solve for that? Like, here's a list of books I like that are entertaining. But if you want to solve for like a real problem, here's like depends on the problem. So someone comes to me, I read the book How to Work with Almost Anyone, and someone comes to me, what problem are they going to say, Darius? I got X problem, and I'm going to tell them your book. What's that problem that's eating at them? That this is just like solves that problem for them.
If you're hungry for working relationships that bring you more success and bring you more happiness, this book is going to help. And it's not just about making, sparkly unicorn fart, wonderful working relationships. I mean, our working relationships are on a bell curve. And my belief is that every working relationship can be better. So that's the problem. It's like every working relationship can be better. So this is a book that if you have a hard working relationship, one that's a struggle, it's going to make that more bearable, more workable. It's not going to solve it. It's not going to magically make it fantastic, but it's going to improve it. John Gottman, a great writer on kind of traditional family marriages, relationships, says that 70% of the issues in a working relationship are set. They're not really solvable. But that means 30% is solvable, is fixable, is improvable. So it's about making the working relationships that are really hard, making them better. It's the ones that are really brilliant for you, it's keeping them brilliant longer. And all the ones that are in the middle that are good enough, it's about learning how to add some magic to those so they play to your strengths and bring out your best even more. So
I love that.
There's something about finding the best possible expression of the working relationship you have with somebody. It's keeping the best people around longer. And then it also solves problems like if you find yourself getting into contractual disputes with vendors and the like, having this conversation on top of the legal contracting allows you to actually figure some stuff out so it doesn't devolve into a fight, but you actually get to negotiate it. Because one of the things that this book does is it gives you permission to keep talking about the health of the relationship, so that when it gets hard, you don't just default to, it's broken, we need to go to legal remedy. It's, hey, this is broken, but the fifth question is, how do we fix it when things go wrong? It's going wrong, so how do we fix this? And there's a way of inviting people back to go, let's see if we can solve this working relationship.
I love that, man. So the book, it comes out in a couple of weeks. Why don't we talk a little bit about how people can get their hands on it? When's it coming out?
Perfect.
And where can they find the book and all that good stuff?
Yeah, June 27th is when it comes out. Best Possible Relationship is the website for the book. And I say that because if you're hearing this before June 27th, there's a bunch of pre-purchase bonuses that you get. And if you're getting to it after it, you can just go there and get the downloads of the 5 questions. You can see a filmed example of a keystone conversation, us working through all 5 of the questions. So there's all sorts of supplementary material that you can get at bestpossiblerelationship.com. And of course, it should be available in all those places where you buy your books.
Awesome, man. So we'll go ahead and put all that stuff in the show notes for people that want to learn more, just to work with you and all the cool stuff you're doing around coaching and helping organizations. What's a good way for them to connect with you on that type of stuff?
Yeah, the website is a really good hub. So the overall website is mbs.works. And then I'm around on some social media. I don't spend a lot of time there, but at mbs_works for Instagram, and I think we still do Twitter, or that's becoming more and more problematic.
Nice, man. Well, Michael, such a pleasure getting to hang out with you. I'm so glad Bob introduced us. I'm so excited for your book. Man,
Thank
this
you.
is really fun. And congratulations, man. Book number, whatever number it is, 9, 10, 100. I know we lost track here, but man,
Yeah.
big shout out to you and the team for putting this together. What I'm going to do is we'll make sure this gets put out before the book for your book launch, because I'm a big fan of helping people during the book launches. So we'll make sure this goes live right around the 27th. But guys, the book is How to Work with Almost Anyone. The man here is Michael Bungay Stanier, and appreciate you so much, my friend. This is awesome.
Darius, was a delight. Thank you so much.
Until next time, listeners, share this with leaders. Leaders were givers. We share the good work. Go buy the book. Until next time, peace out. We love you.
She's my lover.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers, and after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind-the-scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and, gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything. But it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.